Just like the Silicon Valley became the top hub for tech startups, Europe might become the global leader for climate technologies. With lots of capital available, great minds and talents working the topic, and a global crisis that needs bold ideas, 2025 could be remembered as a vintage year for impact investing across the continent. But here's a big question. Will Europe step up and lead or play it safe? Hello and welcome to VCO2, the weekly podcast that helps you become a smarter impact investor and a better climate tech entrepreneur. To unpack this topic, we're joined by Tove Larsson, general partner at Norrsken VC, one of Europe's largest and most ambitious impact venture funds. Tove has been at the heart of the European impact investing ecosystem for more than 5 years now and has invested in at least 3 unicorns. So if anyone can help us see what's coming next, it's Tove. If you like this episode and if you like the show, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to the YouTube channel. It really helps us. And if you're listening as an audio podcast, please give us a 5-star review and a follow on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. It takes a couple of seconds, but really helps the podcast. So thank you so much for doing that. And let's dive in. This episode is sponsored by Dealmaker. Dealmaker helps cleantech companies bypass traditional funding barriers and raise millions on their own terms by going directly to investors online. For example, EnergyX raised over 75 million from 40,000 investors using Dealmaker's solution. So if you're ready to fuel your vision, visit dealmaker.tech to learn more. Thank you to Dealmaker for sponsoring this episode. Tove, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for taking the time. And I guess to get started, before this episode, we were talking about the potential topic, and you mentioned that Europe is more attractive now than ever from an investment perspective. Why is that?
Yeah, I think we all realize why kind of Europe is seeing a new start. So many reasons have caused us to focus more on European sovereignty, and not the least the geopolitical turbulence we're seeing both in West and East actually, and we do see this as a great opportunity for Europe to kind of really rebuild with impact and climate at the very core. And one reason why we think that will happen is because that looking at Europe as a whole, we don't have that much access to fossil fuels, which is actually a good thing these days. So that means that when we have to rebuild the infrastructure and the energy system, focus will be inevitably on renewable energy sources. And also looking at the economics of those resources, I mean, that is today the most cheap way to get access to new energy. So with that kind of as a backbone, we do think that climate will be at the core of rebuilding Europe.
For sure. I think one thing I've observed recently, and you'll tell me if I'm wrong, but I think because of the new policies in the US, we've seen many researchers, entrepreneurs, people coming to Europe as a new place to build their startup because it's much harder in their country. Is that something you observe as well?
Indeed, no, for sure. I think another thing I really wanted to mention is the ecosystem that we're seeing here. We have corporates, universities, investors, a really strong network, really collaborating for climate, and that sets us apart as a continent. And also, given the turbulence in other markets, as you mentioned, but also the stability that we're seeing in Europe with kind of fresh mandates just starting off, we can really kind of provide Europe as a safe haven for impact entrepreneurs and impact investors. So we're really seeing this as Europe's opportunity to step up and take the lead here.
Yeah. And I love that we're talking about Europe, but like, is it as easy as it sounds like to build a startup in Europe? Because, one thing that's on my mind is like Europe is still many countries. It's not one big country. It's very hard to move from place A to place B. Like, what's your take on that? Like, are we doing enough for entrepreneurs to be able to build a European leader?
Mm. A good question. I think there's still a lot to be done there to really kind of streamline and standardize across European markets. At the same time, I think like if you zoom in on US, for example, and we keep hearing this from both US startups and investors that on a state level it can actually differ quite a lot as well. So I don't think we're too far behind on that. And I also think that, and maybe one reason why I think there's a lot of kind of successful companies coming out of Sweden is that if you start in a small market, you will kind of quite soon have to think about internationalization and really kind of build for scale from day one. So like while it's as you say like a challenge, you can also turn it into an opportunity because you from day one need to think about, okay, how can I take this to the next market and make sure that I build something that can really kind of scale across different countries and different regulations. But there's still more to be done, that's for sure.
Yeah, and I think you guys at Norrsken know something or two about it because you were built on the back of a very successful company. I don't know if you want to tell very quickly that story as well. I think it helps for the context of today. But like who's behind Norrsken?
Yeah. Yeah, so the story of Norrsken started about 9 or even 10 years ago now, with the founder of Norrsken Foundation, Niklas Adalberth, who's also one of the co-founders of Klarna. He'd spent 10 plus years building that company. It was super successful. But at one point, he started thinking about, am I part of the challenge or part of the solution here? And he decided that I want to be more part of the solution. So he decided to leave his operational journey there and started thinking a lot about how can I make a difference using both the capital that he gained through that journey, but also his experience as a tech entrepreneur. And the kind of result of that thought process was to start the Norrsken Foundation. And that is today a global ecosystem aiming to help entrepreneurs with impact at core succeed. And we do that through providing the networks, the knowledge, and also the capital needed to help these entrepreneurs succeed. So a lot has happened during these 8 years that we've been investing, and 10 years since Niklas had the initial idea.
Yeah, and I think, I wanted to react on that because obviously, as you were talking about the fact that in Europe, you have to build a country that's going to go global from day one. I think Klarna is a perfect example of it. It wouldn't have been the Klarna that we know today if it had stayed in Sweden, right? Like that would have been possible. So obviously, there's a strong argument there. But look, we're talking about being a leader in climate tech. Um, what are the sectors that you're seeing gaining traction these days? I think a lot of people talk about the grid and grid optimization, but we also should talk about food and carbon and mobility. Like, what are your sectors that you have in mind?
I think like starting maybe very broad, but energy has been really at the top of our list since 2022, and there's still so much more to be done. Huge challenge, but also huge opportunity, as we talked about earlier, when Europe is trying to really kind of build sovereignty in that space. And it's both about accelerating the deployment of renewable energy, but also to kind of take care of some of the side effects of an energy mix that relies more on those renewables. So as you said, a lot about the grid. It's one of the companies in our portfolio that I'm really, really excited about these days is TerraLayer. That are building grid scale energy assets with a software layer on top that is really enabling them to provide energy storage almost like a cloud service. So building an AWS, but for energy.
How does that work technically, like for that specific company? Like, how do you build a storage system on the grid?
How much time do we have? It's a big topic, but like to simplify it, kind of they develop, own, and operate the big batteries that are connected to the grid through kind of key nodes. And then on top of that, they built a software that really enables a customer to tap into these energy assets on demand, and really kind of using this as a almost like a virtually connected power plant that can be distributed across a broad range of locations.
And who are the customers for that? Is that like big companies that needs to have more flexibility? Is that consumers? Like what? Like who's buying the battery to store energy?
Yeah, it has a lot of use cases. Kind of the utility companies is one key customer profile. Also, the kind of more like the wind and solar energy producers, another one. But also taking it kind of further out in time, also a lot of kind of industrial clients and so on. So there's a lot of different use cases for this.
Okay, super interesting. Well, I'll let you continue on the other sectors, but obviously energy is top of mind for everyone, I feel like these days.
For sure. Another sector that we're really passionate about is kind of how we can decarbonize heavy industry. And I think AI really poses a super exciting opportunity here. And just to give more flavor on that too, so one company that we quite recently invested into is Juna AI, and what they're doing is really to apply AI to the processing industry. So, like think paper and pulp, cement, pharma, food, etc. Where a lot of kind of the control inside the plant is still kind of done manually or semi manually, and with like taking advantage of all the data there is and this and the AI technology, they can really automate a lot of these decisions, and that means that you could reduce the energy and electricity consumptions quite immensely. So that's another area that we're super excited about.
Yeah, and I think that's a great topic as well because I'm yet to do an episode on that, but I'm actually thinking about doing a talk show with multiple people about like, is AI a good thing for climate? Because I think a lot of people think about AI as like it consumes a lot of energy. It's rather not a good thing, and your daily usage of ChatGPT is probably not the best use of AI. But in specific industries, I think there's a very good use case for AI to be used as an optimization layer. I feel like, and I think that definitely has a strong impact.
I think, I mean, actually, speaking to what you just said, there is a backside to the whole AI revolution, and that is the footprint that it actually sets. And I wasn't aware about this when we started looking into data centers 5 years ago, but it's actually, having the same environmental footprint, or even a little bit more than the aviation industry. And given the kind of pace at which this accelerates, it's likely to have a much bigger chunk of annual emissions going forward. So that's also a theme that we've been investing into over the last 5 years, but it's probably even more important now. And that is kind of how do we build a backbone here that is really kind of both enabling technological progress, and we do think that there's so many good use cases for AI to provide impact, but also at the same time make sure that we really kind of control and limit the emissions in that from that industry. And then kind of adding to that, like the whole geopolitical situation now, with the even more kind of pressure on data integrity and European sovereignty also on that end. There's a really an exciting to play here in terms of European cloud services, for example. And there we've invested into a company called Evrock that is really aiming to build, the Google Cloud, but for Europe. And we think like this is really the time to build a company like that.
Is that part of your impact thesis? Because if you ask me, AWS doesn't really fit into like any impact criteria for me to invest in, right?
No, for sure. AWS would never fit into our criteria. But what we are really excited about with Evrock is both the environmental footprint. So today you can actually build a data center that significantly reduces the emissions, both in terms of the reduced energy consumption, but you can also look at other factors such as water consumption, which is a huge driver for traditional data centers. But then there's also, so that's the environmental aspect of it. But since we're an impact investor, we're also looking at other parts. And the whole kind of data integrity is also a really important piece from a more social perspective. and that's where European cloud can really play an important role. Because I didn't know this, starting to look into this, but there's so many companies and organizations and governments that have their tech stack on premise, because they're not even able to use cloud services today because the data is so sensitive, and that's again kind of driving a much bigger footprint and inefficiencies. So there's so much we can do that from both a climate and a social perspective.
No, that's super interesting. I'm curious about the cost of their service as compared to like the incumbents and the AWS, the Google Cloud, and all of that. But with all of that combined, like lower climate impacts, lower water impacts, more better social governance, because if the costs are as competitive.
Well, that's really the beauty of it. That and that holds for many of the companies that we look at. That we're looking at companies where impact is at the core of the company, and there's a one-to-one relationship between kind of the financial income that this company generates and the impact that they generate. And looking at impact today, it's a lot about doing more with less. So a lot about resource efficiency, and that's actually in most cases very kind of correlated with making financial sense. So for many of these solutions, it's actually a more cost competitive alternative, or at least at cost comparatively. So that means, and that's really like a criteria that we look for in our investments, because we don't want to back solutions that relies on people wanting to make good or do good to kind of buy the service or product, because we don't think that that is a like sustainable, viable kind of uh, proposal for customers. So so these solutions really compete on both sustainability but also on price.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I guess to maybe transition it into a bit of like another section, and you touched on it a little bit with like the policy and the GDPR for the cloud system. But what are the policies in Europe that are, I guess, playing a role in building Europe as a climate tech hub for the world? Thinking about the Green Deal, maybe there are also like other local incentives in different countries. Like, is there something in that from a policy perspective that we're doing, I guess, better than other continents?
I think there's been a lot of progress over the last few months or year with the Green Deal, as you mentioned, the CBAM, the Clean Industrial Deal, Circular Economy Act, and so on. And all of this kind of really sets the scene for impact entrepreneurs and the level of ambition and commitment that we're seeing from a policy perspective. There's almost always more to be done, I think. And one key thing from our perspective is to really kind of have startups and early stage companies in mind when building these incentives and regulations. But it sets a good example and sets the kind of commitment level from a policy perspective. And one thing that we've been doing, and our friends at the Norrsken Foundation is spending a lot of time on, is kind of how can we put the impact entrepreneurs in front of these policymakers to really kind of connect the dots. And the recent initiative on that end is that we've recently opened up a Norrsken house in Brussels. That will really serve as this way of connecting the founders and the policymakers. So we're hoping to be able to influence or contribute to further progress with that.
It's very interesting because I was talking to Craig from World Fund, and he's also very deep into this topic in terms of like influencing policies. Because we actually talked a lot on the podcast episode with him about like how some of the things that are built in Europe are not always really applicable from a startup perspective, which they are built from a good heart and from the right place, but maybe not always with the right context in mind, which I think is very interesting. And congratulations on launching the Norrsken house in Brussels. I think that's an exciting move from Norrsken. But to transition into another section, I mentioned in the introduction, I mentioned that you have invested in at least three unicorns from when I was looking at your portfolio online, but maybe more in the future because it's not been enough time yet. With that in mind, you also said to me earlier that you think the climate tech investment case in Europe is stronger now than ever. What are the signals that you're seeing? Because I bet a lot of people listening right now would love to have two unicorns in their portfolio, would love to understand how you think about investment, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, just starting with kind of why we think the next unicorns will be, why impact will be overrepresented if we look at kind of the cohorts of unicorns coming out of Europe in the next decade or so. I think coming back to again that this kind of the winners of today are the companies and the solutions that can enable us making more with less. It sounds so simple, but it's really what it's about. And that kind of addresses both climate and social aspects or challenges, but it also addresses some of the biggest challenges, if just from a macro perspective or macroeconomical perspective today, with the high inflation, energy insecurity, and just kind of the building resilience in Europe and so on. So if we look at kind of what companies will succeed more in general, those are some of the themes that we really strongly believe in. And if we translate that into solutions, we're very confident that we will see some of these climate solutions, some of these social solutions, building European sovereignty and so on. Those will be impact unicorns going forward, and those are all themes that we as an impact investor are super excited about. So kind of that's the fundamentals. And then if we start zooming in a little bit more on kind of, okay, so what are the indications? It's really that this is already kind of happening, and if you look at the data, we can already now see that kind of renewable energy is the most cost competitive source of energy for new energy. We see that prices have gone down by like 90% over the last decade. And we can also see that, even without any policies, in 2050, we'll see that 70% of global energy will come from renewable sources. So like the movement is already happening in a way, and that's to us something to kind of take a little bit of comfort in, when in these days when there's so much noise and there's so much talk about, we can't say climate, we can't talk about ESG, we can't talk about diversity. But if we really zoom in on the underlying drivers, the change is already happening. So it doesn't matter as much what people say, because change is already here.
Yeah, and on this podcast, you are free to say climate, ESG, impact, whatever. We really believe in that as well.
Yeah.
Um, but maybe to challenge you a little bit. So, for example, you were talking about the renewables, and definitely, like if you look at solar panels, for example, like if you look at a, a graph that shows, the costs 20 years ago until today, it's crazy to see that curve going like down. It almost feels like it's reaching like zero at some point. Um, but does that mean, like part of my mind is thinking that maybe it's too late? Is that has already happened? So we're not going to see climate unicorns in solar panels, or like is it the right timing right now? Like, do you think it's in the future, or do you think we've missed the train a little bit?
A great question. I think the unicorn potential that we're seeing is probably not in the companies producing the panels. It's rather, or the wind turbines. It's rather the companies. For example, I can mention one of our portfolio companies, Vind, which is a company that helps decide where to best place wind turbines to get optimal yield, maximize yield. And then kind of building on that, create a platform that all these people that are involved throughout the life cycle of a wind turbine, the developers, operators, and so on, to collaborate throughout this whole journey to really maximize returns and hence also impact. I mean, those are the types of companies that we think could make great candidates for unicorns going forward. So it's more about kind of these enabling solutions that can really kind of make sure that we maximize yield on, for example, solar or wind, rather than the actual hardware in that specific case.
And does that only comes from software then?
I think now we're zooming in on kind of renewables. There, I think this from our perspective as an early stage investor with venture type risk, those are the most exciting solutions. And like if we look at the hardware in that case, so like the solar parks and the wind turbine parks, those are now at the level of risk and return, which is more suitable for infra funds. But that differs a lot between different kind of asset classes. So if we look, for example, at the energy assets, the grid scale batteries that we talked about earlier, those are still kind of at a level of development where risk is higher, hence return potential is much higher, and we see great potential for investors like us that are taking that higher risk. So it really you have to zoom in quite specifically, I think, to judge kind of what makes a great VC opportunity versus what is more kind of now in the infra bucket.
Yeah, it's very interesting. It almost feels like it's like you develop the hardware first and then later you optimize, which is kind of the journey that I kind of see in just different industries and different verticals. But maybe taking it a step back. So, if climate is really the next big thing in Europe, uh, uh, do you see LPs as well, backing that claim? Because obviously you've raised, I think, one of the largest, if not the largest, climate tech VC fund in Europe, or are close to be the largest. And I'm sure at some point in time you will have to raise the next fund. I'm curious, what do you hear from LPs as well? Like, are they also excited about climate?
No, for sure. Again, there, I think, like if you read the news or just kind of the general sentiment in the market, you can easily get the sense that, are people really still excited? However, if we look at our LP dialogues, both in the Nordics, where we've always felt a lot of support for our thesis, but also in Europe, where we've seen the kind of the largest inflow of new LPs in our most recent funds. And also, actually, now we started talking a lot more to US LPs and also looking a little bit at Asia. There's still a strong interest here. And people have different rationale for it. I'd say like most of our investors or LPs are institutional investors that are managing huge pools of assets to maximize returns, for example, for life and pension funds and so on. And of course, kind of their number one criteria is that they want to provide great returns to their investors, and they, like us, see the potential here in Europe as a cornerstone for the future, and impact as the kind of building block for Europe. And then if we look at kind of the investors outside of Europe, I think there is still a strong interest, even though it's maybe a little bit more polarized than if we just look back a few years ago. There's still many LPs that are really excited about this from a financial standpoint, and also from the impact standpoint. And if we look at Asia, for example, that's a region where we see more and more focus on these kind of topics, both the challenges, and we see immense investments being made, like for example from China into renewable energy and so on. So there's increased focus there. Um, Maybe one more thing to add is like, so we have these financial investors that are first and foremost concerned about kind of generating great returns for their investors. I think we have a great kind of great rationale for why impact makes sense from that perspective. But then we also have a group of investors that we don't speak about as much, and those are the family offices. And here we also see a lot of potential, especially when we see kind of next generations taking over in these family offices. And I don't know how many calls we've had only this year with, that next generations, the daughters and sons in these families who kind of are now about to take over, and they see this as an opportunity to really kind of shift the direction, change the direction for how to manage their family's wealth, and with that making a difference in the world. So there are multiple kind of reasons why we see increased interest in this asset class.
Yeah, and I love the diversity of profiles that you have. Family offices are definitely uh, getting very interested in climate. A lot of VCs start to talk about that, and I also like the fact that you have LPs from different part of the world that also want to invest in European funds. I think that also tell a good story about Europe being a great place to build great startups in the impact or climate space. But look, something else that you've mentioned before this episode, which I think was very interesting, you told me that in order for Europe to become a leader, we need to be better at failing. Why is that?
Yeah, this is a topic that is really, really close to me and us at Norrsken VC. And maybe the first reason for this is that, we are in the high risk business. To be able to generate outsized return, you need to take a lot of risk. And that means that you will fail. I think like the average fail rate in kind of fund models for VCs is around 50%, and that means that every second company that you invest into will fail. And that's something that you really need to come to terms with as an investor, and it's not easy. I would say, as like personally, that's something that I've been struggling with, because it's so hard to see these founders kind of wake up every day obsessed about their mission, like going out there to fight to solve these critical challenges that are so important for all of us to solve, and then to see them struggle and fail. That's so hard. But we also need to realize that that is part of the business model. And if we don't take that level of risk, we will not get the outsized return, and we will not get the kind of solutions that will really, really change the world from a climate or social perspective. So kind of that is maybe the basis on why I think this is so important. And if I look back at our journey as a fund, kind of, I think this is something that we have learned a lot about over time. When we started investing about 8 years ago now, to be fully kind of fully true to myself, I think we talked a lot about the downside risk. So like, what if this and this and this and this happens and it fails? But at some point, we tried to challenge ourselves, and we even have a term for it, which is like the positive what if scenario. So like, what if everything goes right? Like, what if all the stars align? Like, how big, how good can this be? So the positive what if scenario is something that we nowadays lead with, and that has helped us to take the right level of risk. At the same time, we've also been through like a few different cycles over this last 8 years. We've been through like the early days of COVID, the hype of 21, 22, the war, now the Trump journey. There's been ups and downs, and we've seen some really challenging years for the whole kind of economy. And even though I think climate and impact has been shown to be much more resilient than many other kind of verticals, there has been companies in our portfolio that have struggled, and that's also something that we've now spent quite a lot of time on as a team, to really kind of support each other in those situations, to really kind of in practice implement that we win and fail as a team. And we also talk about, sometimes you win, sometimes you learn, because it's never in vain. So like, try to like, we celebrate successes, but we also try to almost celebrate failures and really kind of make sure we learn from them. And we have a process that we go through after every failure, and that there will be a few of them, as mentioned. Like half of the investments we do will will end up as failures. So we have this post-mortem process that we do after a company has failed, where we look back at, what were the known risks that we took, kind of what played out, what were the unknown risks now in retrospect, and so on. Would we have done this again? What are the key takeaways really? So we try to really leverage those opportunities as a source of learning.
And how do you deal with failure? I mean, emotionally, right? Like, let's put aside the Norrsken group and the fund and all of that. Investing in a company that goes to zero and goes bankrupt is really hard emotionally. Like, how do you deal with that personally?
Personally, I think it has helped me a lot to like we have a culture and the climate in the fund where I can really talk to my colleagues about this in an open and vulnerable way. Um, and I think without that kind of that outlet, I think it would have been so much tougher. I've heard about industry colleagues or friends that struggle to have that open discussion internally, and to me that would make the pressure so much higher. I think like having built a culture where we can be open and vulnerable in those situations and support each other, that has really helped me personally.
Yeah, and I guess, going back to the topic of the day, I think uh, the fact that you can talk openly about it, I think it also increases maybe your appetite for taking risk and making sure that you can actually take risk. Because otherwise, if you're too scared of it, you just end up doing deals that are gonna return, 1x, right? And that's not the point of a VC firm.
No, indeed. And that's also just if I can mention one more anecdote on that is how we kind of our voting system has evolved over time in the investment committee, where we started out again 8 years ago now, very much focused on kind of consensus, and that's also quite Swedish thing that sits very kind of very kind of integrated in Swedish culture, is that you should reach consensus and everyone should agree. And that again does not pose a great ground for taking risk and like really having shot at those outsized returns. So that's also something that we're now very clear about. We need to have at least one partner that is really kind of, we have to do this. But there's also room to have other partners that are not at all that excited about the opportunity. We have the opportunity to kind of put in a veto, and that's especially there for from the impact perspective. We don't want to take that level of risk from the impact perspective. But that aside, like having making those investments where some are really strong yeses and some others are like quite skeptical. I mean, those are probably some of the ones that are at that right kind of risk return level that we should be doing.
Yeah, some people say that in venture, if you want to be successful, you have to invest in companies where it's like a hell yeah. Like it's like
Exactly.
it's
Yeah,
like I'm completely in. It's not like you shouldn't be, I like it kind of thing, right? But look, we have one last section for today. We call it the fire questions. It's a quick section where, like, I'll ask you about 10 questions in the next 5 minutes. You'll have one sentence maximum to answer. Are you ready for that?
for sure.
Great. What's the most exciting pitch you've heard this year?
So that was about asteroid mining, very much kind of a moonshot topic that we ended up investing into. So look into Carbon Plus.
Oh, very interesting. What do VCs need to stop doing in climate tech?
Don't know if it's a stop or start, but when investing in hardware, we're super kind of keen to look at companies where you can scale modularly, so not kind of an all-in, and then we'll see investment thesis.
Very interesting. What's a red flag in a pitch deck that instantly makes you skeptical about the company?
Not having thought about kind of business model or monetization from day one.
Yeah, for sure. And what's a green flag on the other side?
think when it comes to founders, we really want to see them as magnets, attracting, the best people, the capital, and the customer.
For sure. And I think it's, all about the founders very early on as well. So I think it's a very valid point. Is there an underrated country in Europe for climate? Somewhere where like we haven't seen that many VCs invest, but it is actually great for investing?
Hmm. I think Baltics deserves a little bit more attention and love. Yeah.
Is there one thing you wish LPs understood better about impact VCs?
That there doesn't have to be a trade-off between impact and financial returns. That there is rather a correlation, and that could be a flywheel for growth and outsized returns.
Love that. If you are not a VC, what role would you take in the environmental transition?
Hmm. I would love to be a sidekick to any of our inspirational and super ambitious founders out there.
For sure. Talking about your investment committee earlier, a question that popped up in my mind is like, is there one bet that you took that everybody was against you, but you were definitely, hell yeah, we need to invest in that company?
Hmm. I think Evrock was a very bold bet. Is a very bold bet. This kind of European cloud service. I think now this we invested 2 years ago. And now, like everything is pointing in their direction with the AI revolution and the focus on European sovereignty. But at the time, it felt like a very very bold bet.
What's the biggest barrier to accelerating climate tech?
Yes, I think there is still a lack of funding or capital in the later stages. Would love to see that so we can actually scale these solutions.
For sure. The three most important things to be a successful impact VC.
I think number one is defining your investment thesis and impact at the core, the one-to-one relationship between impact and financial returns. So it's like a flywheel and not a trade-off. I think that's number one. I think number two is to look at solutions that really provide these kind of faster, better, cheaper, so that you don't rely on kind of people wanting to do good to buy the service or product. And number three, I would say, is to help your companies define, measure, and communicate the impact that they generate, because that will help them unlock the superpower of being an impact company in terms of attracting capital and talent and customers.
I love that the last one is about supporting the company after the investment. I think that's very interesting as well. But look, one last question for you today. Uh, who is the next climate general partner that I should have on the podcast for an interview? Is there someone that comes to mind?
Yeah, I think you should talk to Fabian Heilemann at I if you haven't already.
I haven't. I'll definitely reach out. And if people want to reach out to you after this interview because they've loved your thesis on Europe and they want to co-invest with you, or anything that they would like to partner with you on, where can they find you online?
So either at Norrsken .vc, our website, or our LinkedIn page or my LinkedIn page. I think those are the best options.
Great. Well, thank you so much. I think this episode really gave me hope in terms of like Europe is going to be the next big climate tech, like central ecosystem for the world. And I think that as a European myself, I think gives me hope. And listeners, if you like this episode and if you like the show, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe if you're on YouTube, or give us a 5-star review on Apple Podcast and Spotify. It definitely helps. Thank you so much, Tove.
Thank you so much.